Okay, here's what I mean how. When you're using your Aqua brush, you should not be squeezing the brush while you paint because you do not want a puddle of paint on the surface of your paper. So if I'm squeezing that brush, I can actually get water to drop onto the surface of the paper. We'll see if I can get the camera to focus. Okay, so I have a water droplet. If I'm turning this to paint and it is a thick puddle, when I try to then paint the color next to it, I'm going to clean my brush off, then I try to do that yellow. Well, look what happens to the yellow. Because that pink is a puddle, now the pink is going to pull into the yellow, and now that yellow is not looking like the color it's supposed to. Now I've lost this edge between those two colors. That's what happens when you use too much water. So practice the amount of hand pressure you need to use on your practice paper first so that you have figured that out before you actually work on your animal. Alright, when you have colored in all of your shapes with your watercolor pencils, then you're going to start turning this to paint. So what I want you to do is look at the edges of your paint paper, and any place where the watercolor pencil was colored right up to the edge, you just stick a piece of paper towel underneath you, because when you turn this to paint, some of the paint might go off the paper and then it's just going to go on the paper towel. But like this area where the watercolor pencil still has plenty of paper around it, I don't need to worry about that as much. So when you turn this to paint, you want to work one color section at a time. And remember that when you use your Aqua brush, you do not squeeze the brush while you're painting. You squeeze it once to get the water flowing, then do not squeeze it as you brush. So in general, anytime you use a paintbrush, you should never push the brush, because when you push the brush, what's happening is you're smashing the bristles, and then that's going to ruin this paintbrush, because then the bristles will not be, they won't lay flat and pointy anymore. So when you paint, you pull the brush backwards away from the end of the bristles, or you can paint side to side, but never pushing forward. Alright, so I have squeezed the brush so I know there's water flowing. You could test it on your paper towel to see if the water's coming out on that paper towel, and then you're ready to paint. So you want to go slowly and paint inside those lines. So I'm not going to paint across onto my red or my pink. I'm just working on this orange section right now. And I can see that it's turning to paint, so I don't need to squeeze my brush. Once I notice that it is no longer turning to paint, that's when I squeeze my brush a little to get the water flowing again. Okay, so now that that one's done, if you notice, I do not have a puddle of paint on the surface of my paper. If I have a puddle of paint, I've used way too much water on this Aqua brush. I have squeezed it too much. You should never have water puddling. Then I'm going to wipe off my brush on my paper towel, clean that off, and then I'm going to work on my next section. If this was a puddle of paint, I would not be able to paint these colors side by side, because when really, really wet paint from one color touches really, really wet paint from another color, they're going to cross over, they're going to mix and bleed. So if you notice that your paint is a puddle, then you're going to want to let that color dry and then work on another area farther away from it so that they're not really, really wet and cross-contaminating. So I'm wiping off my brush. I'm going to work on this pink section. I'm going to squeeze my brush just a little bit because I can tell the paint wasn't working. And then I'm doing my best to paint around the edge of the other colors because I don't want those colors to mix. So this is how you're going to continue to turn your whole animal to paint. I guess I should have said this at the beginning. You do not want to use black paint because you have to put your pattern on top with black Sharpie. So if you use black paint and black Sharpie, you're not going to end up seeing that pattern. But I'm going to continue to turn each section to paint. I like to say just store the cap of the Aqua brush on the back of the pen so you don't lose the cap, but at the end of class when we clean up, make sure that you dry your brush off, clean it off, take that cap off. Then we still have to sanitize these. I collect the Aqua brushes individually to make sure each one was turned back in. Then this paint paper, you're just going to stick on top of your sketchbook, and then you're going to use your sketchbook like a tray to go move it to your shelf to dry overnight.